Welcome back to the Garden of Reason. As you can see, it is wet again, but I have finally figured out a way to drain this garden faster, and after I buy a few more garden hoses, I should have that whole problem whipped. I'm going to have to make this fast because it's getting ready to rain again. I'm fortunate to have anything out here in this garden because we had a storm this week that was the most brutal storm I have ever seen, and there was a lot of hail in it. But fortunately, the plants came through and didn't suffer much damage. I spent more time reading the old books, and I thought I'd share some of the things that I've learned in those with you. Here's my onions. There's not much of a change here. The Texas Super Sweets are on the left. They're starting to bulb up, and the Georgia Sweets are on the right. They haven't started bulbing yet. One of the things the old book said about growing onions was that after they had cultivated their onion fields a few times and had a handle on the weeds, they would go through and plant carrots between every other row. That way the carrots would help provide some shade and keep the weeds down, and they'd get an extra crop out of their land. There's the kale. I'm still feeding that to the chickens, and it's starting to look a little more like kale. I really wish that I could keep that sprayed to keep the cabbage worms off, but with all this rain, it just isn't possible. Here's the sugar beets, and they seem to love the rain. The one that the cutworm got is making a comeback. The old book said that if you want to get rid of cutworms, you need to go after the moth that creates them. They said in the late summer to put a lantern over a tub of water with a little kerosene in it, and you'll kill those moths. I thought I'd give that a try just to see what kind of bugs I would get, and the first night I used the kerosene and I got several bugs. It wasn't a whole lot, but I did get some of those pepper moths that have been eating holes in my strawberry plants and blackberry plants. I would have thought that the kerosene smell would have repelled the bugs, but it didn't. The next night I thought I would give dishwashing liquid a try to see how that would work. I didn't get as many bugs with the dishwashing liquid, so apparently they know what they're talking about using kerosene. I'm having a little problem recording sound on my computer, so I'll put a picture up of the little setup that I did and of the bugs that I got with the dishwashing liquid. I didn't get a picture of the bugs that I got with the kerosene. So here's the tub that I put the water and the dishwashing liquid in, and I hung a light over it. I got some bugs, but I didn't get nearly as many as I did with the kerosene. But I did get some of those pepper moths that have been eating holes in the strawberry plants. That book said this also works on the adults of wireworms, which I think are click beetles. And it also works for what they called May beetles, but the picture they show look like Japanese beetles to me. So this might be a good solution to a Japanese beetle problem. When I used the kerosene, at first I poured in about 1/4 of a cup, and I had a good coating across the top of the water, and the smell was horrendous. And I thought there was no way that a bug was going to get near that, so I pulled a lot of it off, and it just left like a little film. So the next time I would just add a couple of drops of kerosene to it and mix it up thoroughly to get like a film on the top of the water, and I think that would be all that's sufficient. But that absolutely did kill quite a few bugs. Here's the new strawberry plants that I planted. I've stopped picking the blooms off of them. I'm going to go ahead and let them produce, but I need to pick the runners off. Some of them have started putting out runners. I have to keep the runners off of these for the first year. These poor plants haven't seen a whole lot of sunshine, so they're kind of stretched from all the cloudy weather. Here's my potatoes. They suffered the most damage in that storm. There was hail in the storm, and it broke several of the branches off and kind of tore up some of the leaves. It knocked over the plants on both of these boxes on the ends, and I'd hoped they would stand up on their own, but they didn't get enough sunlight to do that. So yesterday I came out here and stood them all up again, and where they had laid on the wet ground for so long, some of the leaves started to show deterioration. So hopefully they'll pull through, but I'm not real encouraged with these potatoes. I mean, they look good, but this is really moving slow. A couple of them tried to bloom the week before last, and then with our erratic temperatures and all, they stopped, and they haven't bloomed. Normally they would be blooming now and I would be digging potatoes in a couple of weeks, but it is not going to happen this time. So I don't know what I'm going to end up with. But when I was working on these beds yesterday, I did see potatoes down there. They're a little bigger than the size of a golf ball right at the surface of the soil. So hopefully it'll all work out. One thing that the old book said that I thought was very interesting was about the eyes on the potatoes. They said that the eyes on potatoes run in diagonals across potatoes. And if you look, they're in a spiral. Here, here, here. They just spiral around the potato. And that comes in handy when you're cutting them to plant them. But as you see, they just spiral all the way around the potato and down. So when you're cutting potatoes to plant them, knowing that will make the job much easier, because I always struggle to try to cut the eyes without ruining some of them. So I can't believe after all these years that I've peeled and cut up potatoes that I never noticed that. But as you can see, they do grow in spirals. And they said there are approximately 16 eyes to a potato. And they did a study a long time ago where they planted a whole potato. They planted some cut in half, they cut some in fourths, and then they cut the eyes out of some and compared the results of growing them that way. And what they found was, and of course this varied from one variety to another, but basically when they planted the whole potato, only 30% of the eyes germinated. When they planted half a potato, they said only about 40% of the eyes germinated. With planting a fourth, about 50% germinated. And by planting them with single eyes, almost 100% germinated. So you'll get better germination if you plant them with one eye per piece of potato. Another study was done to see which would result in a greater yield, if it would be the whole potatoes, the half potatoes, the single eyes, and so forth. That study said that they got about 255 bushels per acre when the whole potato was planted, and they only got like 116 bushels per acre when the single eye was planted. A lot of farmers differed with that. They said they got the exact opposite results, that they got anywhere at least 250 bushels from the single eye, and that it was just too wasteful and too expensive to plant whole potatoes when they were getting the same results with the single eyes. So I guess it would depend on where you live and what variety you're using. But you might get a greater yield if you plant the whole potato. You might get a greater yield if you just plant the single eye. I guess you would have to experiment to find out what would work best for your situation. Here's the red beets that I planted, and the kale's pretty much doing the same. It's actually doing very well down here. I'm surprised because these last two boxes don't get a lot of sun, and they don't normally do as well as the others. Here's the cabbage, and I'm pretty sure this isn't going to hit up in time, but the old books had some interesting things to say about cabbage. They said that if you're saving cabbage seeds to avoid the largest seeds, they'll make leaves instead of heads, and for the same reason they didn't use the seeds until they were at least 3 years old. They said that early varieties of cabbage are better for light soils, and the later ones are better for heavy soils. When they planted cabbage, they would plant lettuce in between them, and by the time the cabbage needed more room, the lettuce had been harvested and was gone. And they also said that they planted radishes around the lettuce, and if they had a problem with harlequin bugs, the harlequin bugs would eat the leaves of the radishes and leave the cabbage alone. They said that when they started their seeds and they thinned out the cabbage seedlings, they would throw out anything that showed remarkable growth. They said that a plant that is in advance of the others is usually in the line of deterioration. They said to only keep the plants that look healthy without grossness. I also read a couple of interesting things about the way that they kept cabbage. I'd heard before that they would bury it upside down and keep it through the winter that way. This book said that they would make a furrow from 6 to 8 inches deep and place the cabbage heads down as closely as they could be set, and then they'd cover it with 1 foot of soil. Those heads had to be fully developed when they did that. Another way of keeping cabbage through the winter that I haven't heard of before is they said you could put them in an orchard or a grove where there was a little bit of natural protection. and put them against a fence with southern or eastern exposure. They said the fence was made tight by a liberal use of straw or stalks or both. Then they placed the cabbages upright at a slant, and they would just stack them in rows and stack them on top of each other. Then they would cover the cabbage with 3 inches of newly fallen leaves, and they would hold the leaves in place with a little bit of soil, or they said you could put a little bit of brush over them or some boards, whatever you had on hand. They said those heads should not be fully developed when you do that, and that they will continue to grow through the winter. I have covered my blueberry bushes. Isn't that lovely? I made some bags out of some wedding tulle a couple of years ago, and I use those bags to cover my blueberries every year. This is the 3rd year for those bags. They've held up well, but I think this will probably be the last year. But I should have made those bags large enough to account for several years of growth, which I didn't. So this year I cut the bags open, and I have 2 bags on each bush. But the wedding tulle works out great. I don't lose blueberries to the birds as long as I have those bags on there. Somebody asked me what these plants were. I keep forgetting to film these, but these are horseradish, and if you plant them, they can be a little bit invasive. I initially planted 2 here, and you see this one here is an offshoot of that one, and then that one there has come from this one. They spread by underground roots. I've been picking strawberries, and I need to get out here and pick some more today. I've had some rot before they even ripen because of all the rain, and some birds got some of them too. And I know that birds don't like anything metallic that moves, but I didn't have time to make anything like that. So one morning before I went to work, I threw some canning lids on the ground around the strawberry plants. And I've only had a bird peck 1 berry since I did that. So these canning lids are keeping the birds away from my strawberries. Here's the plants that I have out front, and as you can see, the birds are leaving them alone with these lids out here. These berries have turned out to be very nice. The variety is called Elon. Nice big berry, and they have a good taste. Here's the garden out back, and I'm having the hardest time getting this planted because I can't get the ground dry enough. Last Saturday it was dry, so I came out here and I tilled it up very well, and I planted about 1/3 of the garden, and then that storm hit and it pounded the ground so bad that you wouldn't even know that this was ever tilled up. So what I have here, I think I'm going to just till it all under and start over from scratch if it ever dries up. Over here, I'm trying to keep the deer out of the garden. What I'm hoping will happen will be that the deer will walk across the garden, they'll trip over that 2x4 and fall and break their neck. Wouldn't it be great if it was that simple? Actually, I'm putting up a wire fence. I also have a raccoon and a rabbit problem out here. So I'm putting a wire fence around this garden, and I'm probably going to electrify it at the bottom and the top as well. And I really need to fence off 2 acres back here because these deer keep eating up my fruit trees. And a man sent me a link to his video where he uses an invisible fence around his garden made of fishing line. He says that he's had a lot of success with it, that since the deer can't see it, they're afraid to jump it. So I'm going to put a link to his video in the description box. If you have a problem with deer, be sure to check that out. And I'm definitely going to try it out myself as soon as I finish working on this one. So that's how my gardens are doing. I hope all of y'all are staying dry and that your gardens are doing well. They're calling for rain every day for the next 10 days here. It's unbelievable. It's a repeat of last year. So that's how I'm doing. I hope it helps.